Hi there, and welcome to Westlake Community Church. We are so excited that you are here joining us today for this amazing content that we have for you. If this is your first time here, welcome, and thank you for joining us. If you're coming back, thanks for coming back, and welcome back. If you want to know more information about our church, Westlake, please visit wl.church for everything that's going on. And if you want to come hang out with us in person, come to 6696 Rockville Road, just west of the 465 loop. You don't want to miss it. Again, we are so thankful that you are here with us today to hear the amazing word that God has in store. Now let's check it out and let's love each other.
Well, this morning we have a very special guest speaker. Now, we are doing a series called Who We Are. We're exploring really our values as a church, who God has made us to be. And as we started laying out this series, there was one person that I really wanted to come and speak to this, because really you're part of who we are, Doug. Dr. Doug Talley is here this morning. Doug is our state pastor in Indiana. Many of you probably know him better as the longtime pastor of Westlake Church. Really, you literally built Westlake Church, and so it is so appropriate to have Doug here with us today. I'm really excited about that. It's about 2 years ago when Doug and I really first connected and talked about the opportunity that would be here at Westlake Church. And I've got to tell you, I walked away from that conversation thinking Doug is the kind of leader that I want to be around. And so as the conversation continued, I was really excited about that. And I'll tell you, it was extremely humbling, maybe one of the most humbling things of my life, that Doug Talley, who loves Westlake to the core of his being, would say, Dale, I think I want you to come and meet the board here at Westlake. That was very, very humbling to me, and so I appreciate that, Doug. And Doug is not just a state pastor, he's not just a former pastor. Doug, you've been a great friend to me in my time here at Westlake, and so would you give a warm Westlake welcome back to Dr. Doug Talley this morning.
Hey, buddy. Love you. Thank you. Thank you, Dale, for the warm welcome, and I am so excited that you are here, and you are doing a fantastic job. Good morning. Yes. Good morning, Westlake. Great to see y'all today. It's so good to be back. Cindy and I are back here periodically, usually a couple of times a year, just popping in for worship. So those of you who've been around since my day, we get to see you periodically. But as I look out, I see some people that I have not seen for quite a while. So welcome back to Westlake, those of you who have popped in for the occasion today. Cindy is not with me today. Yesterday, she started running a fever and just feeling really, really yucky, so made her stay at home. And then this morning, about 1:30 in the morning, we got a phone call from hospice where my mom is in assisted living, and they said, we think your mom probably has less than 24 hours to live. She had fallen a little bit less than a week ago and kind of split the back of her head open and started declining from that point. So when this is over, I swing back north side, grab Cindy, grab a few clothes. We'll be driving down to Atlanta, so appreciate your prayers as we make that trip later on today. But if I get distracted this morning, or if I totally forget where I am, or I fall asleep during my own message, please understand, kind of going through a little bit of crisis right now. But I didn't want to leave for Atlanta without spending some time with you all this morning and sharing as a part of this series. So thank you, Pastor Dale, for the opportunity to do this. The first time I was at this church was October 13th, 1974. 48 years and 3 days ago. In fact, there are a few of you here today. That was the first time I met you, 48 years and 3 days ago. Now, I don't normally keep that track of that. When did I meet people? But I know for some of you, that's when it was, 48 years ago in 3 days. I was invited by a 16-year-old gal named Cindy Cole, who had grown up in this church. Her brother Larry lived down the hall from me at Anderson University, where we were both our first year of college. And Cindy wrote me a letter. We'd never met. She wrote me a letter. She invited me to come home with her brother one weekend and have a date with her, and we'd double date with her brother and his girlfriend. And I had seen a picture of her, and I thought, not bad. Not bad. This could be a pretty safe weekend, and I'm really thinking, what a great opportunity to have a good home-cooked meal. Because my mom was a home ec teacher who grew up on a farm, and I lost 10 pounds my first semester in college eating cafeteria food. So I'm looking forward to a great home-cooked meal. Little did I know Cindy's mother thought a good home-cooked meal involved takeout. And those of you who know Iris know that eating her food is indeed an adventure, and you may have frozen pizza rather than what was cooked on the stove. However, I digress. Long story short, Cindy and I were married in this church, the previous location, but we were married in this church, June 11th, 1977. Don't I look good then? I had hair. Some of you remember that. Long, beautiful hair. And Cindy's flat out gorgeous and still is. But we married in June of 1977. And then in 1979, I became the associate pastor of this church 1 year while I finished seminary, and the church had an interim pastor. And then things developed to where starting in January of 1980, I was the lead pastor here at Westlake. And for those of you who might be kind of new to the church, I was in that role from 1980 until mid-2005. So quite a few years of relationship with this church, with a lot of you who are part of this church. And it's always a joy for me to be able to come back and share with you. In 1984, Bruce Springsteen released an album that title song was Glory Days. And those of you older than me remember that song. The song attempts to capture a feeling that a lot of people have when they look back over their lives and imagine a certain period of their life to have been the best years, the good old days, the glory days. That's my recollection of my first date with Cindy. It was kind of the beginning of the glory years. Have you noticed that as people get older, we talk more about the past than the present? Now, part of the reason for that is the older you get, you've got a whole lot more past than you have present or future. And so you're kind of reliving what has happened. But another part of that is due to the fact that we have a tendency to remember the past as being better than it was. And we tend to forget the challenges, the problems, the difficulties in the years gone by. In truth, the good old days were not always happy, fun-filled times, but that's often how we remember them. Scientists call that the fading effect bias. That means the older you get, the more you look back on the past, you remember the good times, but you forget. The memory of the bad times fades. And you just remember the positive aspects of what happened. The fading effect bias is why families have more than one child. Mom forgets about the pain of childbirth. Parents forget about 36 months or so of pure exhaustion of chasing the little rugrat and taking care of them. And then you venture out and you add another child to the family. Fading effect bias. You forget the hard times, you just remember the good times. Pastoring this church has a lot of wonderful memories for me. But full disclosure, there were some tough seasons. There were some tough challenges. But honestly, I tend to forget about those. And I mainly remember the many good things. That's really what nostalgia is. It's sentimentally remembering the past, remembering the good things that happened in the past, and in the process, imagining that the past was actually better than the present. In working with churches, I find that people who've been in a particular church for a long period of time often look back at the history of that church and remember a certain time period as being the glory days, the glory years of that church. And so often when I'm doing a church consultation, I'll just ask some people, what were the glory years? What were the glory days of your church? When was it? And why were they? And normally they point back to a period of time when the place was buzzing with excitement, the facility was crowded, new people were being reached, and there was just a real sense of God's presence in the room. And as we talk about that, most of the time they want to return to those days, as if you could actually return to the past. Now, I'm not going to suggest that any of you want to return to the days when I was pastor of this congregation, but humor me for a moment. If just one of you was thinking that, even for a fleeting second, listen to this verse. It's from Ecclesiastes. Do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Solomon was the author of those words. And he would say that if you start dreaming about and imagining the old days as being better than these, it's a meaningless pursuit. It's a waste of time. Or one of his favorite phrases, it is vanity. Vanity. I was recently reading an article in Scientific America, and it was about scientists that had been studying nostalgia. And they found that nostalgia improves our mood and possibly even our mental health. In other words, when you think about a time in the past that you're especially fond of, it boosts your spirits. It makes you feel better. And they found that, and catch this part, nostalgia can help us feel connected to our past and give us new energy for the present. I never thought about that before. But when we think about the time, and we think about some good times in the past, they actually connect the present and the past. They serve as kind of a bridge. And then those memories can give us new energy in facing the challenges of today. On October 3rd of this year, very, very recent, I attended my last Indiana Ministries annual meeting as state pastor. That's been my job for the last 17 years. It has been an incredible time of my life. I have enjoyed it. It's different from pastoring, but it's really been a good time. And some of you are aware that by summer of next year, I'll be retiring from Indiana Ministries. So my last annual meeting was a rather emotional day for me. But seriously, it wasn't half as emotional as my last day as pastor of this congregation. But that last annual meeting provided me with an opportunity to address pastors church staffs, and lay leaders around the state and talk to them about what is really important in the life of the church. And basically what I talked to them about was I reminded them what I told them when I first came to Indiana Ministries, what I said at our first state meeting. And that is that local congregations must focus on making more and better disciples of Christ. Now, if you have a history with this church, you've heard that from me time and time again. Job one of the local church is not to circle the wagons and just take care of everybody. Job one of the local church is to reach out with the love of Christ, win people to a life-transforming relationship with Him, and then help people grow up into the likeness of Christ in terms of their character, their relationships, and their behaviors. Matthew 28, 19, and 20 gives the church our mission. And Jesus is speaking to His disciples and to us today. So wherever you go, make disciples of all people. Baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Teach them to do everything I have commanded you. And remember, I am always with you to the end of time. Now, for the last 20-plus years, I have been working with congregations across Indiana and really some in Florida and some other parts of the country as well. And I'm always surprised by the number of churches I encounter who experience missional amnesia. They've forgotten what the mission of the church is. They have adjusted the mission to be having services and events, activities and programs. And they've totally lost sight of Jesus' commission to us to increase the number of Christ followers and increase the Christ likeness in all Christ followers. You know, I pray that this mission of making more and better disciples is woven into the very fabric of Westlake's identity. That's why this church was first started, I'm guessing about 85 years ago. Now, back in the 70s, few of you will remember this, the church went through a hard stretch. Kind of lost sight by the end of the 70s what its mission was. And so after I became pastor, we invited the state pastor of Indiana Ministries at the time, Sam Jolliffe, to come in and do a consultation for the church. And he reminded us what our mission was, to make more and better disciples. And that empowered us to refocus on what God had called us to do as a church. And then a couple of years ago, the church had Indiana Ministries back to do a consultation. And once again, Indiana Ministries reminded this congregation what's job one, what the core mission is. And that is to make more and better disciples. And one of the reasons Pastor Dale was recommended by us to you as a new pastor was because the mission is a part of his heartbeat. That's a priority for him. And I discovered that about him long before there was even an opening in the life of this church for a new pastor. But that's why Pastor Dale is here. It is to lead you on the mission of making more and better disciples. As I interact with pastors today across the state and somewhat across the nation, I'm hearing a lot of churches are nowhere near in Sunday morning attendance what they were in 2019, just prior to when COVID struck. There are a few churches that seem to be back about where their 2019 worship attendance was, but I'm finding that usually congregations are saying 40 to 60% of attendance what it was then now. running about 40 to 60%. I also hear a lot of pastors say, when we get back to what our attendance was in 2019, in other words, when everybody comes back to church that was a part of the church then we will ... It's like they've rewritten Matthew 28 to read, except when there is a pandemic, make disciples. But if you're in a pandemic, circle the wagons, wait for everyone to return, and complain while you wait. Now, being totally honest with you this morning, I found church people can be pretty good at complaining. You know, when things are not what we expect, when they're not what we want them to be, it's so easy for us to stand back and just gripe and complain and to criticize about it. And in the process, we get hijacked by our emotions and distractions. And we lose sight of the mission of making more and better disciples. Churches that are thriving post-pandemic. Man, it's fun to say that word. I know we're just in the early stages of being post-pandemic, but doesn't that sound good? Churches that are thriving post-pandemic aren't focused on who hasn't come back. Instead, they are focused on making new disciples. That's the challenge that the church needs to embrace. Yeah, it would be great if all those people who were here in 2019, 2018, 2015, if they were all coming back. But that's not the reality we're living in. It is what it is. And so the challenge to the church is to pick up where we are and to move forward with the mission of more and better disciples. You know, the mission of Westlake it's not about numbers in a worship service on a Sunday morning. Now, I'd be the first to acknowledge it's more fun to preach to a full house than it is a handful of people. I think Pastor Dale would probably agree with that. But really, the mission of the church is not primarily about what's your attendance on Sunday morning. Instead, it is much more about becoming like Jesus, loving like Jesus, being Jesus in your everyday world, sharing Jesus with your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, discipling the people around you. Your values as a church are rooted in the mission of making more and better disciples. Mission or purpose is what you're supposed to be doing. Values are how you go about accomplishing the mission. So values are a filter for decision making. They are a springboard for action. But the values of Westlake can't just be Pastor Dale's values. They can't just be the board of directors' values. They have to be your values, individually and collectively. Because values describe how a church, the attitude and spirit with which a church goes about accomplishing its mission. You know, in the church, we often struggle to distinguish between mission and method. And we have a tendency to think that method equals mission, and we really buy into a particular method, and we don't want to let go of that. But methods are means to accomplish the mission. They have to change and adapt over time because people change over time. And so if a church is going to be effective in reaching people, it has to be willing to change its methods. You know, there used to be a day when lots of churches had an altar call after the sermon. But altar call is a method. it's not the mission. A lot of churches had Sunday school. Sunday school reached its peak somewhere in the 70s. But Sunday school is a method, not the mission. Small groups, a method, not the mission. I'm going to venture out and say this, but if Marcia Ford comes running up the aisle and has a hatchet, you'll know why. Vacation Bible School is a method, not the mission. And so over time, churches have to adapt the methods they use in order to help people today who don't know Jesus connect with Jesus and then grow up into his likeness. But values generally stay the same. Mission always stays the same. When I was growing up, this was back in the 50s and the 60s, watchmakers had a core value of building quality watches that kept accurate time. And they used springs and gears to build these precise timekeepers. And then about the 1970s, there was a technological revolution, and quartz technology was used to build watches, and they could be mass-produced, and they were actually more accurate than watches made with springs and gears. But most watchmakers forgot they were in the building time-keeping device business, and they thought they were in the springs and the gears business. And so watchmakers continued to build watches by focusing on springs and gears, and the end result is most of them went out of business. And quartz technology gave way to computer technology. And if you have the latest iPhone watch, then you're walking around with an incredible computer on your wrist that's many, many times the size of all the computers that landed the first man on the moon. Sometimes churches become like watchmakers from the 70s. We get so bought into doing things in a certain way that we forget what business we're in. And the business is winning people to a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ and growing them up into the likeness of Jesus Christ. But to accomplish that mission, it's important that you as a church know who you are, that you understand your values, understand your identity. That's why Pastor Dale has been sharing a series, Who Are We? It's really a Hallmark series, not Hallmark like the channel, but Hallmark in terms of something that's really focused, it's huge, it's important, it's a milestone. This is a milestone series that identifies your values as a church. Values that the church as a whole, but also you as an individual part of the church must live out. Now, just a real quick refresher in case you missed a part of that series. There were 5 values. Be secure in your identity as a child of God. Be intentional about growing as a Christ follower. Be a participant by engaging in serving, reaching, and caring. Be welcoming of others regardless of how different from you they are. And be generous. You know, in that series, Pastor Dale has really identified the personality of Westlake, because your values go a long way in shaping your personality. Did you know that churches have personalities? Man, I see that so obviously when I'm pretty much in a different church every week. Churches have different personalities. And we're a little more familiar with how businesses have different personalities. For example, think about the personality of McDonald's, then think about the personality of Chick-fil-A. Cindy and I recently took our grandkids to McDonald's because that's where they wanted to go of all the choices they could have. We went to McDonald's and we sat down, and I took a bite of the first French fry, and guess what it was? It was not hot. At best, it was lukewarm, and it was very stale. And so, took the fries back to the counter, asked the manager for some new fries, and you know the manager's response? Well, it's my pleasure to give you new fries. I am so sorry that we let you down. Here's a free coupon for the next 25 years to eat free at McDonald's. Okay, you know that didn't happen. Instead, the manager said, with an attitude, I guarantee you those fries aren't cold. Well, they fixed some new fries and gave them. Now, contrast that with going to Chick-fil-A. And then, even if your fries were semi-hot and you asked Chick-fil-A to replace them, they would immediately. And if you said thank you, they would respond, you know exactly. Do you know they do not teach their employees to say my pleasure? Instead, it's so much a part of the corporate ethos, it's so much a part of the culture of the organization that employees pick that up simply being around the training process. Businesses have personality. Churches have personalities too. Several years ago, I was visiting a church in Indiana for the very first time. I'd never been there before. Nobody knew me other than one staff person. So I got to the main door and I walked in the door, and there was someone near the front door. I don't know if they were a greeter or they just happened to be standing there, but this person looked over at me and said with an attitude, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" That was my welcome. Now, what do you think my conclusions would be about the personality of that church? Man, I wanted to get out of there just as quick as I possibly could. For those of you who are still part of Westlake and you date back to when I was here, this is something really important for you to know. During the last 5 weeks, Pastor Dale has not been introducing new values. They may be worded a little bit differently, but they are really the same values that identified Westlake when I was here pastoring. And there is continuity of identity and mission because of those values. That's why Pastor Dale has asked me to wrap up this series, to connect the past with the present in order to create energy for this church to be about the mission of making more and better disciples. Over the last couple of decades, there's been a growing number of people in the United States who have left Christianity. They've just walked away. Not for a new religion, but for no religious affiliation at all. So as surveys are sent out, when surveys ask people about religious affiliation, there is an increasing number of people who are checking the box, no religious affiliation. And the shorthand for this group of people are the nuns. That's N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. Okay? The nuns are the fastest growing non-religious or religious category of people in the United States. And it's estimated that unless something happens to change the trajectory, there'll eventually be a majority of people in America. And by the way, the largest age grouping of people who are joining the nuns are the 15 to 29-year-olds. Which means, regardless of the age of people in a congregation, a significant target, so to speak, needs to be reaching people who are children who are young adults, who are teens. Because even though most of these nuns in that 15 to 29 age bracket were raised in church, many of them are now walking away, feeling like God really has nothing to say about their lives and that God hasn't been making a difference in people's lives, so why should they stay connected to Him? As I look at your 5 values, I kind of think of the first 3 as your operating system as an individual in a church. Being secure in your identity as a child of Christ. Be intentional about growing in your relationship with Christ. Being a participant in what God is doing. That seems to be kind of like code of the operating system of the church and those who are part of the church. And then the last 2, being welcoming and being generous, are how those first 3 values are expressed in the life and ministry of the church, but also through the life and ministry of the people who are part of this church. When you are genuinely welcoming of others, especially those who are different from you, and when you are characterized by a spirit of generosity, people notice. People are drawn to that. And you know, when we're not welcoming and when we're not generous, nobody really cares about what's in our hearts. Nothing in their spirit wants what we have. You know, like you, I've grown up and seen plenty of Christians who are not very welcoming or generous. Instead, they were far more judgmental, self-righteous. And I think that's probably the greatest reason for the rapid growth of nuns over the last 15 to 20 years. These are persons who grow up in the church, but they see a lot of self-righteousness, and they see a lot of judgmentalism instead of seeing generosity, instead of seeing a gracious spirit. And they've concluded that if that's what following Jesus is, then they want nothing to do with Him. Can you blame them? Back around 33 AD, there were a few people who believed that a teacher named Jesus was the Son of God and had been raised from the dead by God. This Jesus taught people that they were infinitely valuable to God and deeply loved by Him. And that God wanted to have a life-transforming personal relationship with them. This small group of people embraced the attitudes, the spirit, and the character of Jesus and lived in such a way that people all around them were moved by their graciousness and their generosity and wanted to be like them, wanted to experience what they had experienced in their relationship with Jesus. The more they were around these Jesus followers, the more they wanted to be like them. These Jesus followers were described in the book of Acts as turning the world upside down. But actually, that was not a compliment. It was a criticism. Because what they discovered were these Jesus followers were changing the people and changing the world around them so that they reflected more the character of Jesus than the character of the Roman Empire. And in essence, what the Jesus followers were doing is they were putting the world right side up because the world had gotten turned upside down. You know, our world is rather upside down. People, families, communities are struggling. There is more polarization in our world, in our country now, than any time during my lifetime. God has established Westlake Community Church in this world for a time such as this. You have a mission. That mission is not to circle the wagons and complain. The mission is to win people to a life-transforming relationship with Jesus Christ and then join them in becoming more like Christ every day. This is not a new mission. It's the same mission you had when the church was first started. It's the same mission you had in 1950, 2000, 2019. It's the same mission for tomorrow. And my prayer is that you will pursue this mission with all your hearts to the glory of God. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you for our time to come together and worship you today and to hear from your word and to be challenged. I pray that your Spirit will continue to rest upon this congregation, upon Pastor Dale, Fran, the other staff, the leaders of the church. Father, I pray that you would help the church to be able to zero in on that bullseye of making more and better disciples. There are other things that a church is about, but that's at the very core of why you've called this church into its existence. May the relationship each person who's a part of Westlake has with you be so infectious and contagious that people all over the west side of Indianapolis and beyond want what the people of Westlake have and are able to lead others in coming to Christ and growing in the likeness of your Son. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We hope that message was encouraging, inspiring, challenging, and also taught us something about not only our relationship with Jesus, but our walk with Him every single day. If you like what you heard, please consider coming to join us on Sundays as we celebrate the amazing gifts that God has for us. We celebrate every Sunday at 10 a.m. at 6696 Rockville Road, just west of the 465 Loop. And if you can't make it, that's okay, because all of our church activities and info is on our website at wl.church. Thank you again for checking out this message. Go be blessed and live in the love, peace, and joy that Jesus has for us every single day.